Hello friends, in this video we're going to talk about American idioms and expressions. And if you've ever heard the word idiom before, you've probably heard of this one. It's raining cats and dogs. Now an idiom is a group of words whose meaning is different from the meanings of the individual words. So the words in an idiom might mean one thing, but when you put the words together, it creates a different meaning. For example, if we say it's raining cats and dogs, we've got cats and we've got dogs, but this phrase means nothing about cats and dogs. It means that it's raining a lot. So where do they come from? They're pretty strange. The short answer is they come from history and culture. So we know where some of them come from. Some of them we don't, though, like raining cats and dogs. There's a lot of stories about where it might come from, but nobody's exactly sure. But researchers have found that a lot of idioms or figurative expressions, that is idioms that use some kind of a picture or an image, come from some common sources or metaphors. So that's what we're going to talk about in this video, are how we get these idioms from metaphors. So a metaphor is when we think or talk about one thing like it is another thing. For example, we say, time is money. So we can save money, we can spend money, we can lose money, we can invest money, and we can manage money, or we can run out of money. But we can also save time, spend time, lose time, invest time, manage time, or run out of time. So from these expressions, we can see that we talk about time the same way that we talk about money. This is a metaphor. So what's happening is in our brains, we have what's called a source domain and a target domain. For example, money would be the source domain. That would be the thing that we're thinking about. And time would be the target domain. That's the thing we want to talk about. And from this, when we start to use language, we make these idioms. So we are talking about time as though it's money, and so the words and phrases we use are similar between time and money. We usually do this when we're talking about something that is abstract. For example, time. Abstract means that it's like an idea. It's something in our brains. It's not something that we can touch or taste or smell or feel or hear. We normally talk about abstract things using concrete things. So something concrete is something that I can touch or taste or smell or feel or hear. So because I cannot touch or taste or smell or feel or see or hear time, I need to use something physical or concrete to talk about time. And in this case, I'm using money to talk about time. Now, there are different levels of metaphor, more general ones and more specific ones. For example, a very basic metaphor is that sight or light is knowledge. So from this idea, we can use a phrase or an idiom like to take a closer look at something, which means to try to understand it better. Or we can use a more specific idiom like to put something under a microscope. So the basic metaphor is what's going on in our brain. We are thinking about knowledge like it is sight or light, because sight and light are physical things. When we use an expression, we would use one like take a closer look. So we're not actually looking at something, we are trying to understand it better. So we're talking about understanding as though it's looking at something. And we're taking that same idea to take a closer look at something, and then we're starting to use a more specific image, and like a microscope, because we use a microscope as a tool to try and see something more closely. So we can also use that same idea of a microscope to talk about understanding something more closely, to get more knowledge about it. So what's happening here is we have a literal meaning and we have a figurative meaning, or a non-literal meaning. So if we're thinking about the idiom to put something under a microscope, the literal meaning is to actually look at something using a real microscope. So I mean exactly what I'm saying here. To look at something using a microscope, to put it under a microscope, that's what I actually mean. That's the literal meaning. The figurative meaning is to think or learn about something more carefully and with more detail. So the figurative or non-literal meaning, I'm not actually talking about a microscope. I'm talking about understanding or an idea. So when we read these expressions, like to put something under a microscope, you have to think about the situation where somebody is saying it or writing it. So do they mean it literally or do they mean it figuratively? For example, if I'm reading a news article about science and they talk about putting something under a microscope, they probably mean it literally. They're probably actually talking about a microscope. However, if I'm reading a news article about some kind of a political thing or a business thing, and they talk about putting something under a microscope, they probably mean it figuratively or non-literally, because they don't normally use microscopes in politics or in business. Another example of the levels of metaphor is using the metaphor that life is a journey. So the idea in our brains is that our life and time are like a journey. Now, part of this is the idea that a place is like an experience. So a new place is like a new experience in life. So the journey part would be the place, right? A physical place. But for my life, I'm saying that the place is like an experience. So as an idiom, I can say that I'm in unknown territory if I'm in a new situation, even though I'm not really in a new place. If I find myself in a new situation, I can say that I'm in unknown territory, because a territory is a place. More specifically, I could say that we're not in Kansas anymore. Now, this is a cultural thing. So life is a journey is the basic metaphor. The general idiom is that I'm in unknown territory. And the specific idiom is that we're not in Kansas. So we're not in Kansas anymore actually comes from a movie, an American movie called The Wizard of Oz. Now, the movie is based on a book, but in the movie, the main character, Dorothy, the girl in the bottom picture there, she and her dog are in a completely new land called Oz. And she says to her dog, "We're not in Kansas anymore, Toto." Her dog is Toto. What she means is she's really in a new physical place, but figuratively, she means that she's in a new situation, a completely unknown situation, because everything around her is strange. So in every language, there are idioms, and in every language, there are some common sources where we get these idioms. So for example, every culture has idioms that come from body parts, because that's the thing that's closest to us. So in English, I can say that I'm all ears. We hear with our ears. If I say I'm all ears, that means I'm totally listening to you. Or you could say she has a good head on her shoulders. I'm not actually talking about her head or her shoulders. What I'm saying is that she's very smart or very intelligent. Every language uses bodily functions to make expressions as well, or idioms. For example, if I say that that's tough to swallow, I'm not actually talking about swallowing anything. What I'm saying is it's hard to believe the information that I'm hearing, because I'm talking about information like it's some kind of food or something. Or if I tell somebody to sit tight, then what I'm saying is you need to wait. Or every language uses clothing to make expressions or idioms. In English, I can say off the cuff. If something is off the cuff, that means that it's unplanned. The cuff is the bottom part of the sleeve on a shirt. Or if I say I'm hot under the collar, that means I'm very angry. I'm not actually talking about a collar. And every culture, every language uses animals to make idioms and expressions. Now in English, I could say, for example, it's a dog-eat-dog world. I'm not actually talking about dogs. What I'm saying is that everybody is trying to beat or win against everybody else. Or if I say something's fishy, I'm not talking about fish. What I'm saying is that there's something strange or wrong in the situation. Because in, I guess, American culture, we think of fish as smelling kind of bad. If you leave a fish out, not in a refrigerator, you can smell it. It smells bad. So if I say something's fishy, I'm saying something is not right. It's bad here. So every language uses body parts, body functions, clothing, and animals to make expressions. However, these expressions are usually different from culture to culture. Now, in American English, there are some other sources where we get these idioms that are unique to American culture. For example, farming, specific journeys, seafaring, which means being in a boat or on the water, pioneering, which means traveling to a new land, trains, cars, racing, hunting, conflict or war, guns, the sport of boxing, different kinds of games, the sport of baseball, poker, which is a card game, business, theater, and music. So American English gets a lot of idioms or figurative expressions from these sources. Because if you look at American culture, these are big parts of American culture if you look at the past and the present. Now, if we count the number of idioms that come from just these sources, there are over 1,000 idioms in American English that come from just these sources or these source domains. Now, we can turn these sources into metaphors, and that's how we get the idioms. So I can say like life is a house, or life is a farm, or life is a journey, or life is a journey in a boat. And by doing this, I start to think about different parts of these metaphors and get idioms from them. So, for example, if we think about cars, planes, trains, and boats, they're all transportation. They're ways that we travel. So if we take the idea that life is a journey, well, when I'm on a journey, I can travel in different ways. I can travel by car, I can travel by plane, I can travel by train, or travel by boat. And because of this, I can get the same idea using different metaphors, and I get different idioms out of it. So for example, if I'm leaving in a car, I would say that I'm going to hit the road. So to hit the road means to leave. If I'm in a plane, though, I would say I'm going to take off. So if you're at work or at a party with somebody and they say, hey, I'm going to hit the road, that means they're leaving. Or if they say I'm going to take off, that means they're leaving. So it's the same idea. It's just using a different metaphor. And so we get different idioms from it. If you're on a train, you can say, I'm going to get on track. That means I'm going to start doing something. Or if you're in a boat, you would say, I'm going to head out. So hit the road, take off, head out. They all mean the same thing. We're just using different metaphors to express it. Or if you're having problems, you can say, I'm on a bumpy road right now. Our relationship is on a bumpy road. Or if you can use the metaphor of a plane, life is a plane, you would hit turbulence. So being on a bumpy road or hitting turbulence, it's the same idea, it's saying the same thing. On a train, you would say you're getting off track. Or if you're in a boat, you'd say you're in rough waters. So all four of those idioms mean almost the exact same thing. We're just using different metaphors. Or for a third example, if you're tired, you could say that you're out of gas, you need to refuel, you're out of steam, or you've lost the wind in your sails. They all basically mean the same thing. We're just using different metaphors to express it. And so therefore, that's where we get the different idioms from. So out of gas, need to refuel, out of steam, or lose the wind in your sails. They all basically mean the same thing. Now, why and when will you hear these idioms? They're actually, if you're listening to English or reading English or talking with people in conversation, people use them all the time. But why and when are they using them? There are about 4 basic reasons that people use idioms. The first one is for cohesion. Now, cohesion means to keep something together. So idioms can be used, or metaphors can be used as a cohesive device in a long discussion of a single topic. So if you have, for example, a book or a news article or a lecture, these things are very long. Like a book is very long, or a lecture can be very long. Now, to keep all of the information together, they might use a metaphor or a series of idioms to help connect all of their ideas in the book or all of their ideas in the lecture. So, for example, here's a book on how to become a straight-A student. Now, the author of this book uses the metaphor that life is a conflict or life is a war. And so a lot of the language in the book is war or conflict language. For example, it says unconventional strategies. Strategy is a war or conflict word. The different chapter titles to declare war on procrastination, to demote or marshal or conquer, to plan an action, to target something, a hunting expedition, or to do something like a machine. These are all war words. But the author is talking about being a good student or studying. So he's using a metaphor that being a good student or studying is like being in a war. It's like a conflict. Now, if we look at other headings in the book, he talks about the aftermath. The aftermath is what happens after a war. Battle plan, feeding the machine, or using a search tactic. So in the book, he's not talking about war at all. But he's using language like he's talking about war because he wants you to think about studying and being successful in school like you're fighting a war. So that's a cohesive device. The second reason people use idioms and metaphors is for creativity. That is to make word pictures. So if you're using words, you can kind of draw a picture with the words using imagery. And you'll see this a lot in novels, which are storybooks, poetry, music, popular news columns or news articles, and news headlines. So if the writer is trying to be creative, they will use a lot of idioms and metaphor. For example, here's an excerpt or a part of a book from an author named Helen Keller. She was blind and deaf. And so she had a lot of struggles in her life. And here in this part, she's comparing her struggles as a blind and deaf girl to climbing a hill. She says, "For after all, everyone who wishes to gain true knowledge must climb the hill difficultly alone. And since there is no royal road to the summit is a top of a hill, I must zigzag it in my own way. I slip back many times, I fall, I stand still, I run against the edge of hidden obstacles, lose my temper and find it again and keep it better. I trudge on, I gain a little, I feel encouraged, I get more eager and climb higher and begin to see the widening horizon." So all of this language is the same kind of language you would use if you were talking about climbing a hill and getting to the top of the hill. But she's not actually talking about climbing a hill. She's talking about the difficulty that she's had in life as a blind and deaf girl. The third reason that people use idiom and metaphor is for condensation. That is, trying to say a lot of information in just a few words. To condense something means to make it shorter. So you'll see this a lot in unscripted talk shows. So if you watch a talk show on television that they don't plan out what they're going to say. You hear it a lot in political or sports commentary or interviews, again, where they're not planning what they're going to say. You'll see it a lot in news headlines and in daily conversation. So this is where you hear it a lot in conversation. People are trying to express or say a lot of information using only a few words. So they'll just use idioms that are familiar to them. For example, here's a part of a news program from CNN by the CNN anchor Anderson Cooper. So this is probably only about a minute or so of talking. So if he was saying this would only be about a minute or so. But within this about 1 or 2 minutes of speaking, he uses 7 different idioms. The long road at the end of the day, one man likely to be standing, lane of the field, going the distance, to bank on, and to implode. And these come from different metaphors. But he's using these because it allows him to say a lot more in just a few words. So he's able to talk faster and communicate faster. The fourth reason that people use idioms and metaphor is for clarity. That is, to make a difficult idea easy to understand, to make something clear. For example, you'll see this in introductory books on complex or technical subjects. You'll see it in popular books on complex or technical subjects, and you'll hear these in school lessons and lectures. So if somebody's trying to teach you something usually difficult, and they want to make it simpler, they will often use metaphors and idioms. For example, this is part of a book on teaching leadership. So in trying to teach leadership, the author uses this metaphor that life is like a bus, or a business is like a bus. And so he says the main point is to first get the right people on the bus and the wrong people off the bus before you figure out where to drive it. Now, he's not literally talking about a bus. He's talking about a business. So he's saying the business is like a bus. So you want to get the right people in your business and the wrong people out of your business before you figure out where to drive it. That is where you want to take your business, where you want your business to go. Also in the book, he uses this metaphor of the bus more and more, like getting the right people on the bus, setting a vision for where to drive the bus, using a roadmap for driving the bus, and figuring out the best path. So again, he's not talking about actually driving anywhere. He's not talking about a bus. He's talking about leadership in business. So what are the benefits of learning these idioms through metaphor? Like I said before, we get over 1,000 American idioms from just about 13 different sources. But there's more benefits than that. First, it helps you to remember the idiom more easily. If you understand where the idiom is coming from, what the metaphor is, it will help you to remember it better, because that's the reason that English speakers started using these idioms in the first place, was because they were trying to compare two things. It also helps you to understand the idiom better. Like if you know where it comes from, then you'll understand it better. It also helps you to recognize themes. Like if you're reading a book or an article and there's a theme in there, like the bus in business, then if you recognize, there's a metaphor here, the bus is like a business, then that will help you to understand what the writer is trying to say more easily. And it possibly will help you to understand new idioms. So if a native speaker is trying to use some kind of a new expression, and you understand the different parts of a bus, and he's using something new, then you might understand an idiom you've never heard before, if you understand, like, for example, what a bus is, right? It can also help you to understand American culture and people better. If you understand the metaphors and the sources that Americans are using, it'll help you to understand the culture a little bit better and how Americans think. And if you understand how they think, then you'll understand their language a lot more easily. All right, so that's it for this lesson. Thanks for watching.